So first, welcome everybody here. A lot of friends to the third of our Cristero chat series, Women of Faith. We've been hosting these monthly panel discussion events as a way to stay connected and engaged in relevant conversations during our 25th anniversary year, as we can't be together in person. So thanks to everyone for coming and making that possible, and an extra special thanks to the panelists and our moderator for even more so making this possible, literally. If this is your first Cristero chat, just a couple things. One, if you could please mute yourself, just so you're not accidentally sneezing and coughing in the background while people are talking. Second, if you click on the view box in the corner of your window and switch it to speaker mode, you'll be able to see the person who is talking easier. So everyone click the mute and then click the speaker mode, and that'll be easier for you. If you have a question during the conversation, if you want to type it into the chat box, then we'll be able to answer it in the chat box or at the end of the session. So with that, I'll just say a couple really quick introductions. In the chat box, you'll be able to find more information on our panelists. But very briefly, we have Luz Alvarez, who teaches and directs formation programs for Hispanic lay ministers at University of St. Mary of the Lake at Mundelein Seminary. We have Donna Carroll, long-serving Cristero board member and president of Dominican University for 27 years. Yeah. Beth Franzosa, former Cristero religion teacher and adult formation director, who is now at Rebuff Jesuit Prep in Indianapolis. And Sister Barbara Reed, leading scholar in feminist interpretation of the scriptures, longtime Chicago Theological Union, Catholic Theological Union faculty, and newly elected as the first woman president of that institution. Congratulations. And finally, our moderator, Pat Garrity, who we all know is the former principal of our school for 17 years. Thank you all for making this happen. I will turn it over to Pat and stop talking now.
Thank you, Matt. So as another way of introducing ourselves, I'd like to ask the panelists to start off by considering two questions. One is, what has formed us as women of faith? Those could be life experiences, role models, perhaps examples of biblical women. And the second part of the question is, how has that led us to pursue careers in the formation of others? So I'm going to start by answering this one myself. Otherwise, the other questions I will leave for the panelists, but this one I thought I would answer myself as a way of kicking off our conversation, and then I'll invite the panelists to share their experiences as well. And remember, this is the short version of what has formed us as women of faith, just a minute or so. First of all, I attended Catholic schools for both elementary and high school, and thus I had direct instruction in religion, but also was exposed to environments based upon Catholic Christian values. I'm from an Irish Catholic family, so family ethnic and religious culture played a large part in my formation. I was a young teacher when I learned how Irish and Catholic some of my family practices were, and I learned it by being immersed in the Hispanic community where I was teaching. My Irish American culture rubbing up against Mexican and Puerto Rican cultures both affirmed and challenged who I was, and my life has been profoundly different and richer ever since. Two role models stand out for me. One was a nun I had as a teacher in high school. She always seemed to be such a woman of integrity, that what she said and did and who she was were one. The other was my parents, who, especially in their actions, set an example for me and my siblings of generosity by sharing blessings received, be they financial, intellectual, physical, or spiritual. That's probably how I came to do what I have done professionally. When I was just out of college and looking for my first teaching job, I remember thinking, go somewhere where there's a real need. And that is how I began my career, by teaching in a Catholic inner city school in a low-income Hispanic area. But by far, what has impacted me the most in my own formation has been the opportunities I have had to work professionally in environments where my own faith was nurtured at the same time that I was called upon to be a faith leader, places like Cristo Rey. The more I did it, the more I understood it. Just as I learned English grammar best by teaching it, my faith grew the more I practiced it and shared it and invited others to do the same. And I now invite panelists, jump in, who's ever willing to be the next person to share a little bit about your own formation, please.
Oh, I'll start.
Thank you.
You know, I grew up going to Catholic schools, so faith was there, but really was not a discerning variable until my parents divorced, and I went away to boarding school and was horrifically homesick. And at a certain point, they asked me, "What can we do for you to make you less homesick?"
Mm.
And out of my mouth came, "I want to go to Mass." And it was the first time that I really recognized the sense of home and community that faith provided. When you're the president of an institution, and I think Barbara would speak to this too, particularly a Catholic institution, your faith and your voice is public. So it's a very important discerning variable to really focus on the formation of your adult faith and be able to express it and understand how that vocation feeds your leadership. I would say that the most significant role models for me in my adult faith formation have been the Dominican sisters. You know, I think like many young women, I grew up conflicted about a number of issues in the Catholic Church, but with the Dominicans, I found this integration of feminism and social justice that gave me an optimistic sense of my faith and the faith of the institution, and that has been a significant anchor in who I am and how I lead for the last 25 plus years.
I could follow up on what Donna just said. I would have to say that, like you, the Dominican sisters were very, very influential on me as all through my life. I too went to Catholic grade school, high school, college, all of them. And all through, Dominican sisters were my teachers. First 12 years, Adrian Dominican sisters. Then when I went to Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, I fell in love with the Grand Rapids Dominican sisters. I knew from age 6 that I wanted to be a Dominican sister. And so, but I went from being absolutely enamored with the long flowing white habit of the sisters to, of course, by the time I then became a Dominican sister myself, it was all of the interior values that were attracting me so much. I found sisters to be so joyful, so loving. It was contagious. I wanted to be like them, and I wanted to be one of them, caring about their students, and women who were rather bold about being able to make a difference in the church and in the world. And I wanted to make a difference in the church and in the world. And I knew that joining a whole group that was doing that together was the way to go. But I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that my mother was the first formator of my faith, and remained so all through her life and the majority of my life. So those are my most formative experiences.
My faith formation was done mainly because the women in my family, very resilient women, facing some struggles, but they taught me about how to be merciful with the poor ones. So it was their main way to show me about to be a neighbor. And also the religious sisters who especially taught me how to read the Bible. So they awake my love for the Bible. But I'm so honored to be with one of my role models, Sister Barbara Reed. That was one of my professors being at CTU, and that being at CTU was a moment that changed my perspective, my commitment, my faith commitment. The whole time at CTU was for me a key moment in my life. And also by being at CTU, I was also doing ministry with the Sisters of Mercy, especially with Sisters Joan Perch and Patricia Murphy, that are so committed with the immigrants. So to see them practicing what I was learning in CTU has been for me a very important time in my life. And also, before to come to the United States, there is a woman, a Mexican woman who just was beatified, Concepcion Cabrera de Hermida, a Mexican woman who, she was a lay woman, married with 9 children, founder of several religious communities, lay movements, writer, mystic, that she faced so much struggle just because she was a woman and she was married. So, and having all these witness with me and all these women who has changed my life is the inspiration to pursue a career in the formation of others, because thanks to these women, my life has changed, so I can do the same for other women.
Yeah, I think exactly the same for me. Well, I always wanted to be a teacher since I was little. My mom's a teacher, and I knew, from a young age that I wanted to have that kind of, to be part of somebody's life and to have that kind of formative impact, and to be able to talk about things that were important to me. I didn't really know that ministry was a path. I didn't see it as a path for myself until later. Although I had, wonderful experiences, both in parish, in public school, and in Catholic school, until people started kind of tapping me on the shoulder and saying, like, gosh, when Nan and Jen said, would you consider being a retreat leader in high school? And when Sister Sue and Jan said, we'd like to have you involved in college ministry. We'd like you to try ECHO, my grad school program in parish ministry. And certainly when Pat asked me to take on adult formation at Cristero, those moments changed my life. Those opportunities really changed my life and led me into the next step in my growth as someone who could minister and form others. I think that in my ministry today, I think about that a lot. I think about how I hope that, for my students and for the adults that I work with, I hope I can say, we want to hear your voice. We want your leadership. We want you to listen to your heart. We want you to hear God's voice. And then where does that lead you next? If I can help people be open in the way that others helped me, I think that's the next step.
Well, thank you all very much. And so let's move on to our next question. How do we reconcile the tension that may exist between the messages we receive from faith tradition, from family, from culture, for women to serve, and the importance of women developing a sense of self? And Luz, I'd ask you to start off that conversation for us, please.
Thank you. Yeah, well, the Latino people has been very religious, even before the Christianity was brought to this land. And the Latino culture cannot be understood without connection to the spiritual and transcendental direction in life. But also we know that the official religion has been usually led by the hierarchy, and as consequence with a predominant androcentric perspective. So Sadly, many times it has been an interpretation that women should be subjected to men, no matter how women are treated, and no matter if the men are believers in God or living according to Christian values or not. I say this because sometimes the Bible has been used to say women should do this, but also we don't pay attention what it says about what men should do about their moral living. So these ideas have promoted the machismo and abuse of women, as we know. But in the other hand, the faith of the Latinas is, or Latinos in general, is relational. It is the family's faith because family is the main traditioner or the ones that communicates the faith. Women are the main leaders and protagonists in the cotidiano spirituality. They are the main carriers of the cultural identity and popular religiosity. So we cannot separate faith from culture. So the women are the ones that by word, by example, communicate to the children that God is among us. So it's why we find so many images, holy cars, little altars in the households, because God is with us always. So this teaching of the women to their children is not with abstract ideas, it's with the life, with the sayings like God willing, God will provide, in the name of God, God bless you, usually always will be when the family leaves home. Mothers particularly will bless the children, that God be with you. So in this way, God becomes so close, such as a dear mom or daddy that protects and is always with people in the most simple cotidiano realities. I remember seeing a bus in Durango, Mexico, saying a big, with big letters, God is first. So it's that the most simple you can find. So it's no blasphemy, is because God is so close. God, but and also because the mothers are the main, the ones who communicate the faith. God is almost incarnated in the description of the ideal Latina woman as the one that communicates the Holy Spirit's grace through their teaching, their support, counseling, strengthening, and the love of a mother. So will be the closest image to talk about the love of God. But well, nevertheless, women have been and continue being victims of a patriarchal society that doesn't want to recognize the work and importance of women in this religious task and many other tasks, as we know. I don't want to say that women, especially Latina women, are canonized or everything that they do is perfect. Is why it's so important the human and faith formation of women, because they are the main ones who teach to the children the faith, but also they can teach the machismo or the equal dignity of men and women. So it is fundamental that the faith formation of women is according Jesus' words and actions, according the Gospels. Jesus gave to women the same value and dignity as men. It is so important that women develops a sense of self by listening not to many voices, but to the voice of God, to the word of God, who created men and women as God's image and likeness. And that God, after creating the human being, men and women, so that was good. So sometimes we feel focused more about sin or false and not about that we are created good. So I believe that women cannot be whole and holy or by looking at other human beings. It is only by being the image of God and acting in God likeness, in communion with men as equal beings. Otherwise, we are going to continue the battle that men should dominate, women should dominate men. So it's about to be equals and to manifest God's love among us. So this is how I believe that can be. So I invite the other ones.
Thank you. Any other the panelists want to join in on that one? Barbara.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Luz. And I just want to say that I think that education makes such a difference, and I mean not only formal education, but as you're just describing, informal ways of learning to see from another perspective are so critical. And I've been blessed to have experiences in a number of Latina communities, both in the US and in Latin America, where I've seen how networks of Bible study groups for women have had profound changes in shifting the perspective that many women who've grown up acculturated to the, excuse me, to the kind of machismo and ingrained that they are to serve everybody else and put themselves last, and thinking that this is the way that God intended it. And I've seen the powerful effects that that women forming groups of Bible sharing, and oftentimes it's been women religious who have helped to be the animators in the groups and formed the women then to take over the leadership of the groups, but helping them to draw out of the scriptures how to read con ojos, mente y corazón de mujer. So with the eyes, mind, and heart of a woman, meaning that they have learned through these experiences to challenge some of the interpretations of scripture that have been highlighted and imposed on them. And so instead of focusing on texts like wives be submissive to your husbands, as we find in Paul's letters, learning how to read from another angle and claim their voice as women, and recognizing women disciples in the Gospels that were equally accompanying Jesus and who were the first to have been entrusted with the message of the resurrection, and the kind of empowerment that learning from that perspective and learning to read the same scriptures, but from a position that became empowering for them, is a really important thing that education can do, and even informal education in informal study groups, and the kind of transformation that can have. And I know Pat plans to ask another question, and maybe I could just segue into.
Please,
Yeah.
please do so.
I know Pat intends to ask about the Ministry of Education and the kind of transformation that can have. And just so I just want to say one thing about what I've observed it has done in my faith formation, what education has done and how it has empowered me, is that I grew up in a very faithful Catholic family, Catholic grade school, high school, college, etc. So I was very strongly shaped to be a woman of faith, the title of our discussion this afternoon. But over the years, through education and through an awakening of feminist consciousness and learning what feminist scholars are showing us, and doing precisely what I was just describing, of being able to look from another perspective that values women's understanding and women's wisdom. What it has shifted for me in my journey of faith is from being a woman of faith and being faithful to everything that the church has taught, to becoming shaped into a woman who still considers myself utterly faithful, but doing that, but being faithful sometimes looks like disobedience to some people. And by that, I mean creating good trouble, as John Lewis urged. And so it is a bit of a shakeup when women begin to do theology from their perspective. And so becoming a woman of faith and being faithful now, to me, means oftentimes challenging some of what has been ingrained in us and some of what continues to be taught. And if we have time for me to share just one personal story, I'll never forget when I was a doctoral candidate at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and I was living in the Men's Dominican House of Studies. And they had a wonderful library, and I practically lived in the library. And one of the priests happened to encounter one of my sisters in another context. And so as they were chatting and making the mutual connection of knowing me, he remarked to her, you know, she is a model student, but she's in that library day and night. He says, but what is she ever going to do with a doctorate in biblical studies? Well, I was quite taken aback when the remark was passed on to me. And now, several decades later, I said, yeah, what I've done with that doctorate is not what his brothers would do with that doctorate in biblical studies. And so dreaming up a whole Bible commentary series that is written entirely by feminists. Who knew? What would she do with that doctorate in biblical studies? You know, I don't think he saw any pathway for a woman to use that kind of education. And in some ways, we've had to forge the pathways ourselves. But anyway, let me stop.
No, thank you for sharing that. And yes, you figured out what to do with that doctorate, which is wonderful. So I invite the other panelists also to talk a little bit about education as being transformative. And Barbara, I'm so glad you talked about, it doesn't always mean transforming others. It can be transforming ourselves through our ministerial positions as well. So Donna, Beth, Luce, anyone else want to comment on that?
Beth?
Yeah, I think absolutely education, being an educator has been transformative for me. I have seen the same, you know, the reaction of my students when I will ask them to look for those parts in the Bible that we don't always see, like, right? What was this like? Okay, like there's a woman mentioned in the story, like what was that like for her? Maybe there are people from different social positions mentioned in the story. What was that like for them? And having the students go, I think in the last couple of years as well, it's been really transformative for me to consider my position as a religion teacher. You know, I think when I was a young teacher and even a young parish minister before that, I realized that every time I met someone, I had to say that I was affiliated with the Catholic Church. And I was kind of wondering how that would be. It was almost always positive. People would say, oh yeah, I went to church once, it was all right. But then realizing that as a representative of the Catholic Church, there are some things that I can do and that I should do for equity and for inclusion and for, like, when something happens in the world, I want you to hear about that from your religion teacher. I want you to hear about that in your faith community. And so it has been a heavy weight many times, but also, and I've heard this, directly from my students, we'd like you to talk about this in class. This is something that's hitting me personally, and we want to hear from you. So having that responsibility and taking on kind of what it means to be part of this church and what it means to have a voice in how people see God and see God's love. It's been a great responsibility and also a great privilege.
So Beth, maybe you could, oh, excuse me, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in with two quick thoughts. Increasingly even at the Catholic university level, we see more and more students who come to college with less and less formal faith formation. And so one of the real challenges is to help students link their intuitive behavior, their commitment to social justice, to an understanding of their faith, and to give them language that helps them understand that. And I think that is that opportunity that comes from adult formation, because they haven't come up through a set of stories and history that biases them one way or the other. The other quick point I'd raise, and for Barbara, for myself, for many of us, achieving a position of influence and visibility for a woman in the Catholic Church and in a position of faith comes with an obligation to start to challenge some of that. And I think as we see more women positioned in positions where their voices are heard, we have the opportunity to reshape the narrative a bit and create more space for students to, women in particular, to take steps up into other positions of influence and opportunity.
And Donna, you just moved us into one of our questions about, how have we seen barriers and opportunities for women evolve over the years? And you just gave a great example of that. And so is there another panelist who'd like to comment on that? As you, throughout your professional career, you see opportunities for women in ministry. How have those evolved over the years?
Since this was my question,
Okay.
in the list, maybe I can jump in and then people can piggyback on that. I think we get stuck very often in the women can't be priests dynamic, and then we don't answer this question in a broader perspective. And I do think that. Speaking for Catholic higher education, we're seeing many more women in leadership, in influential positions. I mean, even the Jesuits are now hiring women in positions of leadership. So
Can you imagine?
Can you imagine? Those barriers. Well, let me step back and say I had a colleague and mentor who happened to be a Jesuit president years ago, who, when I was railing against some issue, said to me, in a loving way, Donna, you can see the limits or the possibilities in Catholic education, and the view that you take determines how you lead. And I have always kept that in my head, because truthfully, I found many more possibilities than barriers in my own experience as a woman president. And in fact, having been at this for 27 years, I would say I found enormous advantages. Once upon a time, Catholic Chicago was desperate for a non-nun to sit on many of the boards around the city. And so and Barbara would understand this from a philanthropy perspective, I was sitting next to, enormously influential, this kid, this 39-year-old president was sitting next to enormously influential men of a generation before me, because the community, the Catholic community, was looking for the diversity of that voice. Not many, they just wanted one, but that was enough to give me opportunity and voice. And I found that I found that very often. That's how I got on CTU's board. That 3 or 4, men who were colleagues also on my board were rotating off, and they gave me to CTU as a trustee. And I think it's easy to be flippant about that, but those can be opportunities that can be transformative in a leadership role for your institution, and for you, and I've always found that. So I look at those possibilities.
Yeah, I think that with the people, the Instituto Liderazgo, we see that ministry for women has been always so that women, especially in the Catholic Church, I work for the institution right now, and we always have seen that women are the main ones to minister, to help, to volunteer. The problem is with paid ministry, like to be recognized that what they are doing is important, is valuable. So skills, but is coming more opportunities for paid position, professional positions for women. The leadership has been always there, I believe, in any culture, because by nature, women, we are more open to the transcendency. But I think that, and it's what I did with myself about education, because at one point when I was doing ministry, I didn't have the master's degree, and I knew that if I didn't have a master's degree in theology, I will be asked to do whatever, and the payment will be whatever. So for me, it was very strong. I thought, no matter if I had to work in McDonald's or do whatever to pay my tuition, but I want to have the decision where I want to work, with whom I want to work, and also to request what is the same pay than made for men. I remember sometimes when people ask me that for a talk, and they ask, how much do you charge? My response is, pay me exactly the same that you pay to any other men or women, Anglo or any culture. So that for me is very important, that we bring value to ourselves, and that we don't let them do whatever they want with us.
Excellent points. I'm going to move us into it. One last question before I turn it back over to Matt. And it has to do with the idea of being in ministry, and that ministerial professions really require such a high level of personal investment, sometimes blurring the distinction between personal and professional boundaries. So I'm going to ask Beth to kick this off for us, to speak a little bit to issues of self-care, concepts of professionalism, and personal and professional boundaries, and especially for women in ministerial roles. Beth?
Thanks, Pat. I think when I first started in parish ministry, my training through the ECHO program had been that this is a job, this is a profession, these are the hours you should be working, and then really protect your time at home, your time. I was living with an intentional community, to be really, really strict about that. And I brought that into my first years at Cristero, thinking about my work time and my home time, and they couldn't ever meet or combine, right? And then I think the pendulum kind of shifted for me because of my students and my colleagues at Cristero, thinking about how, okay, this is something that I'm putting my heart into. This is a big piece of what brings me joy in my life. So if I'm doing work, that doesn't mean I'm not doing something that is meaningful and soul-filling for me, right? I think though, I really do love to set some boundaries, and I think that it has an effect on my students as well. You know, when I say that I won't be available by email over the weekend, that also means you don't have to expect to hear from me. You know, that also means you can detach a little bit. I think the same thing can happen in institutions. And I think the other side of it too is that when you're sharing your faith, you know, you are sharing yourself. And I spoke before about how I've seen that that necessity for some, you know, some appropriate level of transparency, right? I'm sorry, that's the bell. I wasn't watching the clock, I apologize. Some appropriate level of transparency, and honestly, it's called me to more authenticity too, to say like, okay, I'm the same person at work that I am at home. I'm the same person, you know, at school that I am with my friends, obviously with the different kind of boundaries talking with students, but this isn't just something I put on. This is something I really believe. This is who I really am.
Donna, would you like to react to that a little?
They're playing with me because I don't believe in balance. I believe in wellness, you know, and I think wellness has a different threshold for different people. But I think in part it comes from the distinctive perspective of leadership, because I think when you're in the role of a president, it's a lifestyle. It's not a job. And so you don't leave it at the office. And it's not conventional in any particular way. And I think that is for a man in the position as well as a woman in the position. And I think a woman looking to lead a Catholic institution has to realize, you know, the all-consuming nature of that role, just as anybody else would do it in that way. And it the counterbalance to that for me is about vocation. I mean, if the alignment of what's meaningful to you, and Beth was talking about this, and the mission of the institution, if that alignment is strong, it gives you a staying power and a resilience that feeds into that concept of wellness. You know, I think for women, and I don't want to stereotype, our challenge is the person role dynamic, that there is great integrity in leading with the heart. And I think women do that most often. That creates a vulnerability that you have to monitor, because a wounded person is no good to your organization. And leadership, fortunately or unfortunately, always gets a lot pushed into it, so that you have to be authentic in your role, living it as a lifestyle, but also monitor, you know, the impact it has on your balance, you know. And as I said, I think that's where purpose and vocation come into play. If it is truly meaningful for you, when the going gets tough, you stick to it. She says that she's retiring.
You know, you're making me remember with these wonderful comments, you're making me remember the day that it dawned on me when I was a novice in my community. And we had one weekend that we could take as vacation at Christmas time when we were novices. And I remember being so excited to go home and have a weekend off from being a novice. And then I get home and everybody is treating me like I'm, you know, like I'm a religious, which I was. And so all of a sudden it dawned on me, even if I go home for the weekend, there's no such thing as taking a vacation from being a novice. And now, you know, from being a religious, I am so in a variation on what all of you have been saying is that it is part of your identity. You can't leave it at the door when you leave the office. And And so that is what makes our ministry so rich and so powerful, is that we put our whole being into it, and our whole identity is shaped around our ministries too, or a good part of our identity is shaped around our ministries. And the challenge of how to not let your ministry and your leadership consume the other parts of your life, so that you achieve that wholeness, that balance that you're talking about, Donna. Yeah.
You know, Jean Murray, who was the former president of Rosary, now Dominican, would often talk about a ministry of presence. And it's something that I often think about as the most powerful element of leadership, being present and balanced and stable. Excuse that balance word there, and hopeful.
For me, it has been very important to set up boundaries because, yeah, I am very task-oriented, and I like to do things well, on time, and with professionalism. However, for me, it has been also very important that to get kind of rid of that expectation about that women has to be always available, and sometimes that we can be valued as a women in the same position as men. We have to do more to prove that we are good. So for me, it has been a kind of goal, being in this position, that trying to look for time to connect with people, and also look for a professional development, or to grow, to attend some workshops, because I understand that being in charge of an institution, there is no choice many times. But at least in my position, I can be called to do many things, so to answer always phone calls or emails. But I need also to teach other women that we are good enough, that we don't have to demonstrate that we have a value, and that we can do our work very well done in a specific frame of time.
Thanks. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt. But one thing I want to comment on, I said to Matt the other day, each one of those questions that we tried to address today could be a course at CTU, or it could be a course at Dominican. And so what we tried to squeeze into a short amount of time is a lot. But I want to thank you, and now I'll turn it back over to Matt.
And thanks to Pat. That was a great job. I hope my audio is working. It was saying it wasn't working. Perfect. So I do have one last question. If any of us are feeling inspired in these final moments, really just a few minutes here, but it's a big question too. But, speaking more broadly about barriers and opportunities, does anyone feel like they have a thought to share about the role of faith in the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion that we're all partaking in these days? What's the role of faith?
I think for me, teaching in a multi-religious environment, the same thing that we've been talking about with reading the Bible, like to present a world in which the students are represented. Like, okay, if you didn't come into this with religion, how can you connect? What Donna was saying earlier about students coming in without faith experience. I think the words that we use and the ways that we present things can give an opening to many different people from different faith experiences and from different ways they have been formed in those faiths.
No, I would say, as a faith-based institution, we have a context and therefore an obligation that gives us a special voice around because the issues of equity and inclusion are deeply anchored in who we are, in our mission. And so it's a matter of finding the courage to speak out and speak forthrightly in what is an evolving and sometimes messy conversation, a difficult conversation. But I know from my own experience advocating around undocumented students, it's probably one of the most powerful and deeply personal elements of my leadership experience.
One of the things that I was thinking about with that question, Matt, is that when we are at our best, our scriptures and tradition give us such a powerful voice for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the church itself has such a reach globally that when we're at our best, we can have such a positive influence around diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I think the most painful for me is when we're not. When we either don't know how to put into practice what is good from our tradition, or when some official church stances are opposite what we would hope for in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that is extremely painful. And then how to stand with those who are being excluded. And I think that women of faith oftentimes take the lead in that.
Absolutely.
For me, the role of faith is key because, well, talking about especially from the Latino culture that is very faith religious oriented. So before to focus in theology, I was pursuing a career in chemistry, like something more practical, more like you can have care and make changes. But because the experience of being changed through the theology, through the scripture, that my whole life changed direction in values. I realized that words are not neutral. Words, the ideas that we get through words shape our feelings, our actions. So the formation of the faith is key to be able to knowledge and to experience and to act with inclusion, with justice, that we can accept our diversity as not as a challenge, but as an opportunity and as richness. Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. All of our panelists, you were all really amazing today. Keep up the good work. And thanks to all of our guests for joining us today as well. I will say a shameless plug in these last couple of minutes here before we all go on with our days that hopefully we'll see you again for our April 15th Cristero chat on Ignatian volunteerism. And very exciting, we have a special guest lined up for that chat. G.R. Kearney, former Jesuit volunteer at Cristo Rey, who wrote the book on Cristo Rey, literally More Than a Dream About the Founding of the School. It's a really great book. You can give us a call and we'll tell you more about it. But you will receive instructions to register for that conversation very soon. So thank you all again for coming. Thank you again to our panelists for the wonderful conversation, and look forward to seeing everybody again very soon. Thank you so much, everybody.